Hearty shalom to you. Jeffrey Seif here. Pleased you are taking a look at the book. Glad you're reading the Bible. I'm glad you're interested in the Tree of Life version of the Bible. I like the name Tree of Life. You know, it harks back to Genesis and goes to Revelation at the beginning and at the end. And as we make our journey from the womb to the tomb, from our own beginning and toward our own end, kudos to those who make the Bible their companion in any rendition. Of course, the Tree of Life version is looking at the news through the eyes of the Jews, and I so appreciate that. This week, we're working through an interesting section in Leviticus that deals with physical maladies, physical issues. It starts off in the 12th chapter. We're looking at a woman giving birth to a child and issues associated with that. In 13 and on, we're looking at individuals with certain afflictions, and they're being examined by the priest. Conceptually, it's a little different than what we're used to in modernity, because there's medical practitioners over here and there's religious leaders over there, and they're not the same. In antiquity, however, the priests did have a medical function. They were physicians. They were, I should say, they examined bodies to determine clean and unclean, as we'll see in a moment. They were building inspectors too. They examined a dwelling. If there was a blotch, a mold on a building that would contain something communicable, they could have the building destroyed. If someone had a blemish on their body that was adjudged to be communicable, they could have the person expunged, removed from the camp. They had a certain kind of juridical authority. They could look, they could examine, they could decide. Conversely, when someone who did have this sickness manifested a healing, they would present to the priest, and the priest would say, okay, you're good to go now. After examining, there were certain ceremonies, and inasmuch as the priest could exclude them from the camp, they could include them as well, subsequent to an investigation that turned up that they were healthy now. I mean, it's interesting to see a religious leader as a gatekeeper to a community, to look at the physical health and well-being of a community, and somehow the religious leader, the Levite, is responsible for that. We're not used to that at all, seeing religious leaders have that kind of authority, but we do need to keep in mind when we go back, when we open up the Bible, we're going back to an ancient world. I am looking at the 13th chapter of the book of Leviticus here, Vayikra, as we know it, meaning, and he called. And what's interesting is the priest, in the 13th chapter, they have an anomaly and they present to the leader. We're told when a man has a swelling on the skin of his body, or a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes the plague mark of tsarat, or leprosy, in his flesh, then he shall be brought to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons, the Kohanim, the priest singular or the priests plural. The next verse, the Kohen is to examine the plague of tsarat on his skin, and if the hair in the plague has turned white and the appearance of the plague is deeper than the body's skin, it is the plague of tsarat. Thus the Kohen shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. Again, just to go back and remind and to move forward on this, it strikes me as interesting to see a religious leader have this function. But they do. They're guardians of the well-being of a community, and leprosy is less an issue for us in our culture in modernity than it was for them in their culture in antiquity. Some years ago, to wrap my arms around this a little more conceptually, I read a book by a medical doctor who worked in countries where leprosy was still the bane, and got some insight into it. Leprosy was construed as a kind of living death for various reasons. It starts at the extremities. You get it on your toes, you get it on your fingers, you get it on your nose, and it just consumes the body as it goes. It starts off little, and then it just kills as it goes. It's a living death. The argument is a swift death would be kinder. Here these individuals have this malady, and for periods of time they just literally rot away, and they rot away in isolation because they're unclean. They're removed from the camp. They're They're hurt twice. Not only are they hurt in their body, but certainly emotionally and socially they're hurt because they're removed. They're persona non grata in that condition because they can do harm to others. It really is very unfortunate. And I've read too how it deadens the nerve as it goes and grows. And someone with leprosy can be lying there and to wake up in the middle of the night and a rat is chewing away at their foot. They don't even know it because it's not telegraphing signals to the body. It really is just awful. I don't want to pretend to be an amateur epidemiologist to try and speak to the issue. You can get the point and you can look it up yourself. When we're entering into the world of Leviticus, we're seeing the priest as a guardian for the camp who's game to keep the health of the camp intact. And similarly, in modernity, religious leaders are game to keep the mental health and the spiritual health going. And sometimes that means not just disciplining someone who's adjudged to be unhealthy for all, but affecting their removal. It's much less the case now. Every reverend or rabbi wants to get every friend he or she can get to fill the pew and maybe drop a coin in the tin as it makes its rounds. And people are much less apt to do that, unfortunately. We don't think of the minister in that capacity. I want to reflect for a moment on just the disease itself and give voice to how ancient rabbis saw it, and then give an application to that. That in the Hertz, J.H. Hertz is the former chief rabbi of the British Empire, and in as much as I'm working from the thin line version of our rendition, I'm looking through his text, Pentateuch and Haftorot. It's a good introduction to the way Jews see the news. And he notes, and I'm quoting him on page 461, the rabbis regard leprosy as a providential affliction in the punishment for slander for talebearing, lashon hara, an evil tongue. It's construed as a providential affliction. I looked at a Hasidic website just in preparation for my little talk this morning, and leprosy was adjudged to be, something as a supernatural. It's not leprosy in the classic sense, but it's kind of a leprous. It's a divine affliction. What's interesting is the perception that God visits people with a malady is the nature of the malady itself comes in response to a particular sin, according to certain sages. Lashon hara, an evil tongue, slander, gossip. Now, there's reasons for this in the text. It's cross-referenced. The way the story is told is that when someone slanders someone says, gee, I think that Jeffrey Seif is such and such. In the process of so doing, they kill themselves in three ways. And they kill three people, actually. They spread death in three ways. That number one is by talking about things they really don't know and spreading innuendo, they kill a little piece of their own humanity by being that way. Secondly, by sowing into the mind of another, oh, Jeffrey Seif is this and that, then they kill a little bit of me because my reputation in the world is now besmirched and a little part of me is dead. And then thirdly, they kill a little part of the person they're speaking to because they were just living their life, and now all of a sudden in their cerebral cortex is this little piece of gossip. And gossip can grow and grow and grow, and it takes a life of its own. That's the way leprosy was perceived, that gossip, lashon hara, lashon, a tongue, hara, ra is the word evil, an evil tongue. It's like leprosy because it starts off small, but then it takes a life of its own and it winds up killing. And that happens. People don't speak properly. In the New Testament, in 2 Timothy chapter 2, you can look at Paul gives voice to the fact that some people aren't talking right, and he says these two, they're like a cancer that spreads. We're working with the same thing philosophically. Well, don't be that way. You want to give a good word, have a good tongue, and as you enter into the biblical world and read the biblical word, it has a way of bridling our senses and sensibilities and making us a better person than we otherwise might be. Don't be guilty of slander. Don't contribute to that. I hope you derive some benefit from this. And if you do, by the way, please consider making a donation to the Tree of Life Bible Society. We exist not only to produce the text, but to keep it moving in the culture. And, it takes money to do that, as with all else. Well, God bless. See you next week. Jeffrey Seif here, signing out.